I still remember the exact sound. Not the sound of a plane. Not the sound of people screaming. The sound I remember most was a zipper. A cheap, worn-out zipper opening inside a crowded airport terminal. It's strange what the human brain chooses to keep forever. People always ask me when I first met the love of my life. They expect some romantic story. Maybe I noticed her smile. Maybe she spilled coffee on me. Maybe our eyes met across a crowded room. They're always disappointed when I tell them the truth. Because when I first saw Claire Donovan, I hated her. And for almost a year, I believed she had destroyed my life. I had no idea she had actually saved it. My name is Logan Mercer. I'm from Seattle, Washington. In 2022, I was 32 years old and worked as a wildlife photographer for a documentary company. My job wasn't glamorous. Most of the time, it meant sleeping in tents, hiking through forests before sunrise, and waiting hours, or even days, for a single perfect photograph. But I loved every second of it. Nature never lied. People did. That year was supposed to change everything. National Geographic had announced a competition for photographers documenting endangered wildlife in North America. The winner would receive a contract worth more money than I had ever imagined, along with the opportunity to lead international expeditions. I had spent nearly 2 years preparing. Every paycheck had gone toward camera equipment. Every vacation had become another scouting trip. Every sacrifice had one purpose: this competition. The assignment would take me deep into the mountains of Montana, where rumors had spread about a rarely photographed family of gray wolves living far from human civilization. If I captured them, my career would finally begin. At least that was the plan. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport was unusually crowded that morning. People hurried through security, with coffee cups in one hand and rolling suitcases in the other. Children cried. Flight announcements echoed through the terminal. I stood near gate C-18, checking my backpack for the 10th time. 2 camera bodies. For lenses. Drone batteries. Memory cards. Satellite phone. Everything was exactly where it belonged. I wasn't nervous. I was ready. After years of waiting. This was finally happening. Then my phone rang. It was my younger sister, Ava. "You'd better answer," she said before I could even speak. "I've got 30 seconds. You forgot Mom's birthday." I closed my eyes. "You're kidding." "Nope. I mailed the gift." "You mailed it 3 weeks ago. You forgot to call." I sighed. "Tell her I'm boarding." "You're not boarding for another 45 minutes. You always ruin my excuses. That's literally my job as your sister." I laughed. She wasn't wrong. After promising I'd call Mom the second I landed, I hung up and headed toward a small bookstore across from the gate. Mom loved mystery novels. Maybe I could still buy something for her at the airport. It wasn't much, but it was better than another apology. The bookstore was quiet compared to the terminal outside. Soft jazz music played through hidden speakers. The smell of fresh paper and coffee filled the room. I picked up 2 novels and walked toward the register. That's when someone crashed into me. Books scattered across the floor. "Oh my God!" A woman's voice. "I'm so sorry." I looked down. A leather backpack had slammed into mine. Papers, maps, old photographs. Everything spilled between us. She immediately dropped to her knees. "I am so sorry." I knelt down to help. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. She moved quickly, collecting photographs before I could see them. Almost protectively. "Here." I handed her one that had slid beneath a shelf. She hesitated before taking it. "Thanks." That was the first time I really looked at her. Chestnut brown hair tied into a messy ponytail. Green eyes. No makeup. A faded denim jacket covered in tiny paint stains. She looked more like an artist than someone catching a flight. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded too quickly. "Yeah. Just clumsy." "You nearly tackled me." "I've done worse." She smiled awkwardly. Then she looked at her watch. The smile disappeared. "Oh no." She grabbed everything as fast as she could. "I'm late." Before I could respond, she was gone. I paid for the books and returned to gate C-18. People had already begun lining up. Perfect timing. I placed my backpack beside my chair, while checking my boarding pass one last time. Boarding Group 3. Good. A gate agent announced a slight delay. 10 minutes. No problem. I grabbed my headphones from my backpack. Except, they weren't there. I frowned. I searched again. Still nothing. Weird. Maybe I'd packed them somewhere else. Then I noticed something even stranger. The inside of my backpack looked different. The lining wasn't black anymore. It was dark blue. I froze. No. I opened every compartment. No cameras. No drone batteries. No satellite phone. Instead, paintbrushes, sketchbooks, colored pencils, a silver compass, and dozens of old photographs tied together with a faded red ribbon. My heart stopped. This isn't mine. The backpack, the bookstore, the girl. We had grabbed the wrong bags. I sprinted toward the bookstore. Empty. The cashier looked confused as I ran inside. The woman. What woman? Brown hair, denim jacket, about 5'7". He shrugged. She left a few minutes ago. Which way? I don't know. I rushed through every nearby gate. Nothing. Every hallway. Nothing. Every cafe. Nothing. I called airport information. Nothing. No one could locate her. I returned to my gate completely out of breath. Boarding had already begun. A gate agent scanned passengers one by one. Sir. I looked down at the backpack, then at the aircraft outside the window, then back toward the terminal. My cameras, my entire career, were somewhere inside Seattle Airport, and boarding would close in less than 5 minutes. I can't get on this flight. The gate agent blinked. Sir? My equipment is gone. She looked sympathetic. I'm sorry. I have to find someone. I'm afraid boarding closes in 4 minutes. I know. If you don't board now, your ticket will be canceled. I stared at the aircraft. Everything I had worked for. Gone. I can't. The gate door closed without me. I watched the plane push back from the terminal. For the first time in years. I felt completely defeated. I had no idea that less than 3 hours later, every television in the airport would interrupt its programming with breaking news. And I had no idea that the woman who had walked away with my backpack had just unknowingly rewritten the rest of my life. I sat in the terminal long after my flight had disappeared into the gray Seattle sky. The empty gate felt strangely quiet now. Families had moved on to their next flights. Business travelers hurried past without looking up, and the gate agents were already preparing for another departure. Meanwhile, I was still sitting there with a stranger's backpack, resting beside my feet. Every few minutes, I convinced myself she would come back. She had to. Sooner or later, she'd realize she was carrying tens of thousands of dollars worth of camera equipment instead of her art supplies. She would panic. She would return. At least. That's what I kept telling myself. An hour passed. Then another. Nothing. I finally stood up and walked toward the airport's lost and found office. A middle-aged employee listened patiently while I explained everything. So you accidentally exchanged backpacks? Yes. Do you know her name? No. Phone number? No. Address? No. He typed for a moment. I'm sorry, sir, no one has reported finding another backpack. I rubbed my forehead. What about security cameras? I'm afraid those require a police request. So that's it. For now. He handed me a small form. If either backpack is turned in, we'll contact you immediately. It felt hopeless. Still, I filled out every line. Camera serial numbers. Description of the backpack. My phone number. Email. Home address. Then I walked away feeling as though 2 years of my life had disappeared with stranger. I found a quiet corner near a coffee stand and opened her backpack again. Maybe there was something that could help me identify her. Inside, everything was arranged with surprising care. Sketchbooks, pencils, brushes, a folded road map of Montana, several old postcards from small American towns, a flashlight, a silver compass that looked decades old. And underneath everything, a small leather journal. I hesitated. Reading someone else's journal felt wrong, but I also had no other way to find her. I slowly opened the first page. There was no diary entry. Only a single sentence written in careful handwriting. Some journeys begin after everything falls apart. No name. I turned another page. Blank. Another. Blank again. Almost the entire notebook was empty, except for the very last page. There, written in blue ink, were 3 words. Don't stop driving. I frowned. What did that even mean? My phone vibrated. It was my editor. Logan. I know. Where are you? Still in Seattle. Silence. What happened? I explained everything. The backpack. The mistake. Missing the flight. Another long silence followed. Finally he sighed. I've known you for 8 years. Yeah. You have the worst luck of anyone I've ever met. I appreciate the support. I'm serious. So am I. He paused before speaking again. I'll try to convince them to let you join another expedition. But without your equipment. I know. And if someone else photographs those wolves first. I know. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The opportunity of a lifetime was slipping away. Around 2 in the afternoon, hunger finally forced me to leave the gate. As I walked toward the food court, I noticed nearly every television screen suddenly changed channels. The usual sports broadcasts disappeared. A red banner flashed across the bottom. Breaking news. People slowed down. Some stopped walking altogether. The airport became strangely quiet. The news anchor looked unusually serious. We're receiving reports that Regional Flight 247, traveling from Seattle to Bozeman, Montana, has disappeared from radar approximately 90 minutes after takeoff. My heart stopped. Flight 247. That was my flight. The reporter continued. Search and rescue teams have been dispatched after the aircraft reportedly encountered severe weather over the northern Rocky Mountains. No one around me spoke. A woman covered her mouth. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." I couldn't breathe. That wasn't possible. I had been standing at gate C-18 less than 3 hours earlier. I should have been on that plane. I should have been sitting in seat 14A. Instead, I was standing in an airport food court holding a paper cup of coffee. The television switched to aerial footage of dark mountains covered in clouds. Emergency helicopters. Police vehicles. Search crews. The anchor's voice grew quieter. We do not yet know how many survivors there may be. I stared at the screen without blinking. Every face around me looked exactly the same. Shock. Disbelief. Fear. I slowly looked down at the backpack beside my feet. If Claire hadn't taken mine, I never would have missed boarding. The realization hit me so hard I nearly dropped the coffee. She hadn't ruined my life. She had accidentally saved it. That evening the airport felt different. Heavy. Silent. People spoke in whispers. I checked into a nearby hotel because I couldn't bring myself to go home. I turned on the television. Every channel covered the same story. Rescue teams. Snow. Rain. Dangerous terrain. No confirmed survivors. The interviews blurred together. I barely heard them. My mind kept replaying one moment. Claire saying, "I'm so sorry." If only she knew. Around midnight, there was a knock at my hotel room door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a hotel employee handed me a small envelope. "This was left for you." For me. Someone asked us to deliver it if you checked in. Who? "I'm sorry, sir," she didn't leave her name. My pulse quickened. She. I thanked him, closed the door, and immediately opened the envelope. Inside was a single Polaroid photograph. It showed an abandoned train station somewhere in the mountains. Written across the bottom in black marker were 6 words. "I know where your backpack is." No signature. No address. No explanation. Only those 6 words. I stared at the photograph for several long seconds. Then I turned it over. On the back was one final handwritten sentence. "If you still trust strangers, come alone." I didn't sleep at all that night. Because for the first time, I realized this had never been just about 2 backpacks. Someone wanted me to follow them. And somehow, I already knew that I would. I should have thrown the photograph away. That would have been the smart thing to do. Forget the backpack. Call the police. Go home. Try to rebuild my career. Any reasonable person would have done exactly that. Instead, I spent the entire night staring at a faded Polaroid of an abandoned train station that didn't even have a name. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but another voice, one I couldn't explain, kept asking the same question. What if this is my only chance to get my life back? At 6 the next morning, I drove to the Seattle Police Department. The officer at the front desk listened carefully while I explained everything. The switch backpacks, the missed flight, the breaking news, the mysterious photograph. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. So, this woman hasn't threatened you? No. Asked for money? No. Stolen anything besides your backpack? No. He nodded slowly. It could just be someone trying to return your belongings in an unusual way. Then why not meet me at the airport? He shrugged. I wish I had an answer. I showed him the Polaroid. He studied it for a moment. No station name. No landmarks. No address. Can you trace who delivered it? The hotel doesn't have security footage from a hallway yet. They're checking. He handed the photo back. I can't stop you from going. But if you do, tell someone where you're headed. By noon, I was back at my apartment. The place felt emptier than ever. Camera lenses lined the shelves. Framed wildlife photographs covered the walls. Awards, certificates, memories from places most people only dreamed of visiting. And yet every empty space reminded me of the equipment that was still missing. I sat down at my desk and looked at the Polaroid again. Something caught my attention. In the background, barely visible behind the old station, stood a weathered water tower. Painted across it were faded white letters. Only 3 remained readable. I zoomed in using my computer. The image became blurry. Still. Denver, Silver, River, or Evergreen. I searched online for abandoned train stations with old water towers across Montana and Washington. Hundreds appeared. Hours passed. Nothing matched. Then, almost by accident, I found an old railway enthusiasts forum. Someone had uploaded a photograph nearly 15 years earlier. I froze. Same station. Same tower. Same broken windows. The caption read, Black Pine Station, closed since 1987. Location, northern Montana. Almost 50 miles from the nearest town. I rented the first SUV I could find. The drive would take nearly 11 hours. Friends called. I ignored them. My editor called twice. I ignored him too. There was only one thing on my mind. Claire. Who was she? Why had she disappeared? Why hadn't she simply returned my backpack? And most importantly, how had she known where I would stay that night? The farther east I drove, the emptier the highways became. Cities gave way to forests. Forests became endless mountains. Radio stations faded into static. By sunset, I had crossed into Montana. Dark clouds rolled over the peaks ahead. Rain began tapping against the windshield. The GPS lost signal. Perfect. I laughed to myself. Of course it did. Near midnight, I stopped at the only gas station for miles. An elderly man stood behind the counter reading a newspaper. I placed the Polaroid on the counter. Have you ever seen this place? He adjusted his glasses. His expression changed almost instantly. Where'd you get this? So you know it. He didn't answer. Instead, he looked out the window toward my SUV. You're heading there? I think so. He remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he folded his newspaper. They closed that station almost 40 years ago. I know. Nobody goes there. I'm looking for someone. His eyes narrowed. A young woman. I felt every muscle in my body tighten. How do you know that? He sighed. Because she was here yesterday. Yesterday. Claire had been here. She was only one day ahead of me. What did she say? Bought fuel. And asked if the road was still open. My pulse quickened. Did she leave a name? No. What was she driving? A blue Jeep. Exactly one day ahead. I was catching up. Before leaving, I asked him one last question. Did she seem afraid? The old man thought for a moment. No. He looked me straight in the eyes. She looked like she was running out of time. An hour later, I finally reached the dirt road leading toward Black Pine Station. Branches scraped against the sides of the SUV. Fog covered everything beyond a few yards. Then I saw it, an old wooden sign leaning crooked beside the road, the faded letters barely visible. Black Pine Station. The place looked exactly like the photograph. Maybe even worse. Broken windows, collapsed platform, rusted train tracks disappearing into the forest. The station had been abandoned for decades. Rain dripped from the roof. Wind howled through the empty building. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped inside. Damn. The air smelled of wet wood and dust. The waiting room was empty. Old benches lay overturned. Pieces of the ceiling had fallen to the floor years ago. There was no sign of anyone. No footprints. No vehicle. No Claire. For a moment, I wondered if I had driven 11 hours for nothing. Then my flashlight landed on something sitting neatly on one of the benches. A small wooden box. It hadn't been there for decades. Someone had placed it there recently. My name was written across the lid. Logan. I slowly opened it. Inside was one of my camera lenses. The expensive telephoto lens I thought I'd never see again. Wrapped around it was a folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Only one sentence was written inside. If you found this, you're closer than you think. Before I could read it again, a loud engine echoed somewhere outside. I rushed to the broken window. Far down the muddy road, I caught a glimpse of a blue Jeep disappearing into the forest. Claire had been here. Not hours ago. Minutes. Without thinking, I sprinted back to my SUV. I turned the key, the engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the accelerator. For the first time since we switched backpacks, I wasn't chasing my camera gear anymore. I was chasing the woman who had somehow turned my entire life into a mystery. And deep down, I had the strange feeling she wanted me to catch her. The blue Jeep disappeared around the next bend before I could get close enough to read the license plate. I pressed harder on the accelerator. Mud sprayed behind my SUV as the narrow forest road twisted between towering pine trees. Thick fog clung to the ground, making it almost impossible to see more than 50 yards ahead. Every few seconds, I caught another glimpse of her taillights. Then they vanished again. "This is insane," I muttered. I was chasing a woman I had known for less than 30 seconds. A woman who had accidentally, or maybe intentionally, saved my life. A woman who somehow knew exactly where I would go next. None of it made sense anymore. The road suddenly split into two directions. I slammed on the brakes. No Jeep. No tire tracks I could clearly follow. Just silence. I stepped out into the cold mountain air. The forest was so quiet it almost hurt. Then I heard it. A faint metallic sound. Clang. Like an old chain moving in the wind. The noise came from the left road. I climbed back into the SUV and followed it. 5 minutes later, the trees opened into a clearing. An old suspension bridge stretched across a deep river below. Half the wooden planks were missing. A rusted sign warned, "Bridge closed." On the other side, the blue Jeep was parked, empty. My heart began pounding. I looked around. Claire. Only the river answered. I called again. Nothing. The bridge groaned beneath my weight as I carefully crossed one plank at a time. The river rushed violently beneath my feet. One wrong step, and it would be over. Halfway across, I noticed something tied to one of the steel cables. Another note. Of course. I untied it carefully. This one was different. It wasn't just a sentence. It was a question. Do you still believe everything happens by accident? I read it twice. 3 times. The words echoed inside my head. Because if I was being honest, no, I didn't. Not anymore. When I finally reached the other side, I found the Jeep. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside were empty coffee cups, a folded blanket, a road atlas. Nothing else. No backpack. No phone. No Claire. She had disappeared again. I searched the surrounding woods for almost an hour. Nothing. As the sun began to set, frustration finally caught up with me. I leaned against the Jeep and laughed bitterly. "What are you doing?" I said aloud. "You've been chasing clues left by someone you don't even know." Then I heard footsteps. Slow, careful, crunching through the leaves behind me. I spun around. A man in his 60s stepped out from between the trees. He wore a thick flannel jacket and carried a fishing rod over one shoulder. He looked more surprised to see me than I was to see him. "You looking for the young woman?" he asked. I didn't even bother asking how he knew. "Yes." He nodded. "She was here this morning." Again. Always one step ahead. "Did she say where she was going?" "No. Anything at all." The old man smiled faintly. "She asked me one question." "What was it?" He looked toward the river. "Do you think people can change someone else's destiny?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "What did you tell her?" "I said destiny changes every time we make a choice." He paused. She smiled. Before leaving, the fisherman reached into his jacket pocket. "I almost forgot." He handed me a small brass key. "She asked me to give you this." The key was old. Very old. The number 17 was engraved on it. "Did she tell you what it opens?" "No. Nothing. Just one thing." "What?" The old man looked me directly in the eyes. "Tell Logan he's finally asking the right questions." That night, I rented a room at a tiny roadside motel 20 miles away. It looked like it hadn't changed since the 1970s. The owner barely spoke. I locked the door behind me and emptied everything onto the bed. The Polaroid, the journal, the compass, the brass key, my camera lens, the notes. It felt less like luggage and more like pieces of a puzzle. Then I remembered something. The journal. I opened it again. For some reason, I held the brass key against the back cover. There was a soft click. I frowned. The back cover shifted slightly. A hidden compartment. Inside was a folded map. Not a road map. A hand-drawn one. Several places were circled in red. Black Pine Station. The bridge. A lake called Mirror Lake. And one final location. A small coastal town in Washington. Port Crescent. At the bottom of the map, in Claire's handwriting, was another message. "This is where the truth begins." My phone buzzed. An unknown number. I answered immediately. "Hello." Silence. Then a woman's voice. Soft. "Come. I was wondering how long it would take you to find the compartment." I froze. "Claire." Another brief silence. "You're closer than anyone else has ever been." "Who are you?" "You already know my name." "No. I don't know anything." "You know one thing." "What?" "I never switched our backpacks by accident." Before I could respond, she added quietly, "And if you really want the truth." A loud crackling sound interrupted the call. Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone in disbelief. She had finally admitted it. The backpack swap had been intentional from the very beginning. But why? And who else had been trying to find her before me? I had a feeling that the answer waiting in Port Crescent would change everything I thought I knew. I left the motel before sunrise. For the first time since this strange journey had begun, I wasn't driving toward a guess. I had a destination. Port Crescent, Washington. According to the map hidden inside Claire's journal, that was where the truth begins. Those 4 words stayed with me the entire drive. Not ends. Begins. Which meant everything I'd discovered so far was only the beginning. The highway followed the Pacific coastline for miles. Fog rolled over the ocean like waves of smoke. Fishing boats drifted through the mist. The farther I drove, the older the towns became. Small diners, weathered gas stations, lighthouses standing against the crashing waves. Around noon, a faded wooden sign finally appeared. "Welcome to Port Crescent population. 1,482." The town looked as though time had forgotten it. Colorful fishing boats rocked gently in the harbor. Old brick buildings lined the narrow streets. People actually waved at each other. It felt peaceful. Too peaceful. The first place I stopped was a small diner overlooking the marina. A bell rang as I opened the door. The smell of fresh coffee and homemade pie filled the room. A waitress smiled. "Sit anywhere you like." I ordered coffee and a sandwich. Then, trying to sound casual, I asked, "I'm looking for someone." She nodded. "Tourist." "Maybe." I pulled the Polaroid from my pocket. "Have you ever seen this woman?" She looked at the picture for less than 2 seconds. Then her smile disappeared. You know Claire? I nearly dropped my coffee. You know her. The waitress looked toward the kitchen before lowering her voice. Everybody here knows Claire. For a second, I thought I had misheard her. Everybody? She grew up here. Less than 10 minutes later, I had learned more about Claire than I had in the previous 3 days. She had spent her childhood in Port Crescent. She had painted murals around town when she was a teenager. She volunteered at the local animal rescue center. She disappeared several years ago. No one seemed to know why. Was she in trouble? I asked. The waitress slowly shook her head. No. Then why did she leave? Her eyes filled with sadness. She said she had something she needed to finish. What? I don't think anyone ever knew. Before leaving, she pointed toward the harbor. If you're looking for answers. She hesitated. Go see Mr. Whitmore. Who's that? He owned the lighthouse. Owned. He still lives there. The lighthouse stood alone on a rocky cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It had probably been there for over 100 years. Waves crashed against the rocks below. Seagulls circled overhead. I climbed the long staircase leading to the front door. Before I could knock, the door opened. An elderly man with silver hair looked at me as though he'd been expecting me. You must be Logan. I stopped breathing for a second. How do you know my name? He smiled faintly. Claire said you'd come. Of course she did. His name was Arthur Whitmore. He invited me inside without asking a single question. The lighthouse was filled with paintings. Hundreds of them. Landscapes, mountains, forests, wildlife, and portraits. One portrait immediately caught my attention. It was Claire, standing beneath the northern lights. She looked younger, happier. You painted these? I asked. Arthur shook his head. Claire did. I turned toward him. She's an artist. The best I've ever known. He poured 2 cups of tea before speaking again. You've been wondering why she switched the backpacks. Every second. He sighed. I can't answer that. Why not? Because I promised her. I stood up. People keep saying that. He remained calm. And people keep forgetting that some promises are more important than answers. I sat back down. He reached into a drawer beside his chair. When he returned, he placed a small envelope on the table. She asked me to give you this. Another envelope. Another clue. I opened it carefully. Inside was an old photograph. It showed Claire standing beside me. I stared at it in complete disbelief. What? My voice almost disappeared. That's impossible. The picture had clearly been taken years earlier. I was wearing a hiking jacket I hadn't owned in a long time. Claire looked younger too, but I had absolutely no memory of that moment. I've never seen this before. Arthur nodded. I know. Who took it? I did. When? 7 years ago. 7 years. Long before the airport. Long before the backpacks. Long before any of this. I looked at him. I've never met Claire before. Arthur remained silent. Finally he said, That's what you believe. A cold chill spread through my body. I turned the photograph over. On the back, written in Claire's handwriting, were the words, Some people enter your life twice. The first time. You simply don't realize it. I looked up. What does that mean? Arthur smiled sadly. You're asking the right questions. I was beginning to hate that sentence. As evening approached, Arthur insisted I stay for dinner. We sat near the lighthouse windows, watching the waves crash against the cliffs. For the first time in days. Everything felt calm, until someone knocked on the door. 3 slow knocks. Arthur's expression changed instantly. He wasn't expecting anyone. Neither was I. He opened the door. A young delivery driver stood outside holding a small package. This was left for Mr. Logan Mercer. I frowned. I didn't order anything. The driver shrugged. Someone paid cash. He left before I could ask another question. Arthur placed the package on the table. It wasn't heavy. Carefully, I removed the brown paper wrapping. Inside was my camera. One of the 2 bodies that had disappeared with Claire. It was perfectly clean. Perfect condition. Around the camera strap was another handwritten note. This one was different from all the others. Only 5 words. Tomorrow come alone. Midnight. Beneath the message was an address. An abandoned observatory overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Arthur read the note over my shoulder. His face turned pale. "What is it?" I asked. He looked toward the darkening sea. "I was afraid she'd choose that place." "Why?" He hesitated, then quietly answered, "Because that's where everything began." He paused. "And where someone died." The room fell completely silent. Outside, thunder rolled over the ocean. For the first time since this journey started. I wasn't wondering whether I should go. I was wondering whether I'd come back. I didn't tell Arthur I was leaving. Around 11 that night, I quietly stepped out of the lighthouse with my camera slung over my shoulder and the note folded inside my jacket. The address led to a place called Raven Hill, a rocky cliff nearly 20 miles north of Port Crescent. The road became narrower with every mile. Eventually, the pavement ended. From there, it was nothing but gravel, trees, and darkness. Rain began falling just as I reached the parking area. The abandoned observatory stood at the top of the hill like the skeleton of another century. Its massive dome was cracked open, and several windows had long since shattered. It looked as though no one had set foot there in years. Yet a single light glowed faintly inside. I checked my watch. 11:58 p.m. My heartbeat felt louder than the rain. I climbed the stone steps and slowly pushed open the heavy wooden door. It creaked loudly. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight. The enormous telescope still pointed toward the night sky through the broken dome. Somebody had lit an old oil lantern near the center of the room. Beside it stood Claire, for the first time since the airport. She didn't run. She didn't disappear. She simply looked at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked almost exactly as I remembered. The same chestnut hair. The same green eyes. Only now they carried a sadness I hadn't noticed before. Finally she smiled. "You found me." I shook my head. "No. You wanted me to." Her smile faded. "You're right." I walked closer until only a few feet separated us. "So." My voice was calm, but my mind was racing. "Was any of this an accident?" She looked down at the lantern. "No." "The backpacks?" "No." "The notes?" "No." "The train station?" "No." I let out a slow breath. "So you've been leading me here from the very beginning?" "Yes." "Why?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her jacket and handed me my wallet. The same leather wallet I'd thought was inside my missing backpack. Everything was still there. Cash, driver's license, credit cards. Nothing had been touched. "I never wanted anything that belonged to you," she said quietly. "Then why take it?" "Because I needed you to miss that flight." The words echoed through the observatory. I stared at her. "You keep saying that like it explains everything." "It doesn't." "Then explain it." Claire looked toward the telescope. "Have you ever survived something that everyone else didn't?" I didn't answer. "You wake up every morning wondering why you're still alive." She swallowed hard. "You start believing someone else deserved your place." I finally spoke. "The passengers." She nodded. "I've read every single name." "So have I. My cousin was on that flight." I froze. "What?" She looked away. "Daniel." Her voice cracked for the first time. He was 28. He loved hiking. He was getting married 3 months later. Silence filled the room. I switched our backpacks. She whispered, "Because Daniel begged me to." Everything inside me stopped. "What?" "He called me 20 minutes before boarding." "That doesn't make any sense." "It didn't then. It doesn't now." Tears filled her eyes. He said, "Claire, if anything happens today, don't let Logan get on that plane." My blood ran cold. I took a step backward. "How? Did he know my name?" "I don't know." "He'd never met me." "I know. Then how?" "I've been trying to answer that question for 4 years." I stared at her in disbelief. "You're asking me to believe that your cousin somehow predicted a plane crash?" "No." "Then what are you saying?" I'm saying. She hesitated. He knew something terrible was going to happen. That's impossible. I've told myself that every day. She reached into her backpack and carefully removed an old voice recorder. I want you to hear something. She pressed play. Static filled the room. Then a man's voice. Calm. Steady. Claire looked several years younger as she spoke in the recording. Daniel, you're scaring me. The man laughed softly. I know. Then stop talking like this. I can't. Why? A long pause. Then he said something that made every hair on my arms stand up. If Logan Mercer boards that flight, he won't come home. The recording ended. The observatory fell silent. Rain hammered against the broken dome overhead. I couldn't move. Couldn't think. I had never heard Daniel's voice before. Yet somehow, he had known my full name. Finally, I managed to ask the only question that mattered. Who was Daniel? Claire looked directly into my eyes. He was an investigative journalist. What was he investigating? She slowly shook her head. That's what someone has been trying to keep buried ever since he died. Before I could ask another question, the sound of tires echoed outside. Not one vehicle. Several. Headlights swept across the broken windows. Claire's face instantly lost all color. No, she whispered. They found us. Who? Instead of answering, she grabbed my arm. We have to leave. The front door burst open. Heavy footsteps echoed through the observatory. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness. Then a deep voice shouted, There they are. Claire looked at me with fear in her eyes. They were never after me, Logan. She tightened her grip on my sleeve. They've been looking for you. There they are. The shout echoed through the observatory. 3 flashlight beams swept across the room. Claire grabbed my wrist. Run. There wasn't time to ask questions. We sprinted toward a narrow metal staircase that spiraled upward inside the observatory. Heavy footsteps thundered behind us. Stop. Someone shouted again. Another voice answered, Don't let them get outside. Who were these people? Police? Private investigators? Criminals? I had no idea. All I knew was that Claire looked genuinely terrified. We reached the upper observation deck. Wind roared through the broken dome. Rain soaked us within seconds. Claire pulled open a rusted maintenance hatch. Through here. The narrow passage led onto the roof. I hesitated. Are you serious? You trust me now, or you never will. I didn't have a choice. We crawled across the slippery metal roof while flashlights danced below us. One wrong move, and we'd fall nearly 40 feet. Behind us, voices echoed through the observatory. They're on the roof. Hurry. Claire reached the edge first. A rusty fire ladder descended the outside wall. She climbed down without hesitation. I followed. Seconds later, we landed behind the building, hidden by thick evergreen trees. Neither of us stopped running. Almost 15 minutes later, we reached the Jeep. Both of us were soaked and breathing hard. Claire started the engine. The headlights remained off. She drove, using only the moonlight filtering through the trees. Finally, after several miles, she pulled onto a deserted logging road and stopped. Neither of us spoke. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. Rain drummed against the windshield. Then I finally broke the silence. No more riddles. She nodded. No more. You owe me the truth. I do. She looked exhausted, older than she had just an hour earlier. I've lied to you. I figured. But not about everything. So tell me what isn't a lie. She took a slow breath. My cousin Daniel wasn't predicting the future. I frowned. What do you mean? He wasn't psychic. Then why did he say my name? Because. She looked directly at me. He had already met you. I stared at her. That's impossible. No, I've never met Daniel. You just don't remember. I laughed bitterly. Claire, I think I'd remember meeting someone whose last words changed my life. You met him in Yellowstone National Park. My smile disappeared. Yellowstone. The name stirred something deep inside my memory. A distant image. A mountain trail. A camera around my neck. Smoke from a campfire. She noticed my expression. "You remember something?" "Barely." She reached into the back seat and picked up a weathered cardboard tube. Inside was an old panoramic photograph. She carefully unrolled it across the dashboard. "There." She pointed to the center. I leaned closer. The photograph showed a group of hikers standing beside a wooden overlook. The date printed in the corner read, August 14th, 2015. I recognized myself immediately. I was younger, a little thinner, standing with my camera. Next to me, a smiling man with dark hair rested one hand on my shoulder. I had never noticed him before. Claire touched the picture. "That's Daniel." Pieces of forgotten memories began returning. The hiking trail, a broken camera strap, sharing lunch with strangers, talking about photography, a man who asked endless questions, his laugh, his notebook. "Oh my God!" I whispered. "I remember him." Claire nodded. "You spent almost 3 hours hiking together." "But I never knew his last name." "He knew yours." I looked at the photograph again. What was he investigating? She hesitated. "Plane maintenance companies." I looked up sharply. "What?" He believed several regional airlines had been hiding serious mechanical problems. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. He found evidence. Enough to make powerful people nervous. I slowly looked back at the photograph. Daniel had been carrying a camera too. What does any of this have to do with me? Claire answered quietly. "Everything." She reached into the cardboard tube again. This time she removed one of my own photographs. I immediately recognized it. A landscape I'd taken in Yellowstone years earlier. I sold this print hundreds of times. "I know. Why do you have it?" "Turn it over." I flipped it around. Nothing. Then Claire handed me a small flashlight. "Shine it through." Confused, I held the light behind the print. At first, nothing. Then, tiny handwritten words appeared between the layers of photographic paper. Invisible ink. My heart nearly stopped. There was an entire message hidden inside my photograph. It wasn't addressed to Claire. It was addressed to me. "Logan, if you're reading this, Daniel was right not to trust anyone. The proof is hidden where only a photographer would look." My hands began shaking. This has been here the whole time?" Claire nodded. "For years. I sold copies of this. But only the original contains the message." I kept reading. "Someone will eventually come looking for this photograph. Do not give it to them. Find locker 17. Locker 17. I looked up so quickly my neck hurt. The key. Claire reached into her pocket. The brass key. Number 17. The same one the fisherman had given me. Everything suddenly connected. The key wasn't for the journal. "No. It opens the locker." "Yes." "Where?" Claire swallowed. "Seattle." Neither of us spoke for nearly a minute. The rain had finally stopped. Far away, thunder rolled across the ocean. Finally, I looked at Claire. "So everything. The backpack. The train station. The map. The notes. All of it was leading me back home." She smiled sadly. "It always was." I leaned back in my seat. "I've spent an entire week driving across 2 states, only to end up returning to Seattle. You needed to know why first." I couldn't argue with that. If she'd simply handed me the key at the airport, I never would have believed her. Suddenly, headlights appeared in the rear-view mirror. One vehicle, then another, then a third. Claire looked back. "They found us again." I started the engine. "No." She grabbed my arm. "Wait." "What?" "They aren't following me." She pointed toward the lead SUV. I looked carefully. A small federal badge was visible behind the windshield. "Who are they?" Claire whispered only 2 words. "Federal agents." Before either of us could react, the lead SUV accelerated. It swerved across the narrow logging road and rammed directly into the side of our Jeep. The impact spun us toward the edge of the cliff. The guardrail exploded beneath us. For one terrifying second, the Jeep hung suspended over the Pacific Ocean. Then the ground disappeared beneath us. People say that in the moments before you think you're going to die, your whole life flashes before your eyes. That wasn't what happened to me. As the Jeep broke through the guardrail and tipped over the edge of the cliff, I wasn't thinking about my childhood, or my career, or even the plane I had never boarded. I was looking at Claire. She looked back at me. Neither of us screamed. There was only one word on her lips. Logan. Then the world flipped upside down. The Jeep rolled once, twice. Glass exploded around us. Metal screamed against the rocks. The airbags deployed with a deafening blast. My head slammed against the driver's window. Everything went white, then black, then white again. Finally, silence. When I opened my eyes, I could hear the ocean. The Jeep had landed on a narrow rocky ledge nearly 40 feet below the road. One more roll, and we would have fallen straight into the Pacific. The windshield was gone. The engine hissed. Steam poured from beneath the hood. I tried moving. Pain shot through my left shoulder. Nothing felt broken, just bruised. Claire. No answer. My heart immediately began racing. I turned toward the passenger seat. She was unconscious. A thin line of blood ran down the side of her forehead. No. I unbuckled my seatbelt and crawled toward her. Claire. I gently touched her hand. It was warm. Thank God. Claire, wake up. For several terrifying seconds. Nothing. Then she took a deep breath. Her eyes slowly opened. She smiled weakly. I guess. She coughed. We're both terrible drivers. Despite everything. I laughed. It was the first genuine laugh either of us had shared. We climbed out through the broken windshield. The rain had stopped completely. Above us, the damaged guardrail looked impossibly far away. The SUVs remained on the road. Whoever had hit us wasn't climbing down. At least. Not yet. Claire looked around. They'll call someone. Police. She shook her head. I don't think so. You still think they aren't federal agents? She nodded. If they were, they would have identified themselves. She was right. The badge I had seen had only been visible for a second. Maybe. Too briefly. We need to move. Claire pointed toward a narrow trail running along the cliffside. It looked dangerous. Loose rocks, steep drops, but it was our only option. For nearly an hour, we followed the trail until we reached a small sea cave hidden behind enormous boulders. Inside, it was dry, cold, safe, at least for the moment. I finally looked at Claire. Enough. She nodded. No more secrets. You've said that before. I mean it this time. I folded my arms. Start with Daniel. She stared at the cave floor for several seconds. Then she began. My parents died when I was 12. I was raised by my aunt. Daniel was like my older brother. He believed the truth always mattered more than comfort. She smiled faintly. Sometimes I hated him for that. He became an investigative journalist because he couldn't ignore lies. He spent almost 2 years investigating an aviation maintenance company. I listened without interrupting. He discovered maintenance reports were being altered. Aircraft with serious mechanical issues were being certified as safe. I felt my stomach tighten. The company had powerful investors, lawyers, political connections. And when Daniel got close to publishing everything, she stopped speaking. What happened? He disappeared. I already knew the answer before she said it. They found his body 3 days later. Silence filled the cave. The waves outside crashed endlessly against the rocks. He left evidence. Claire continued quietly, but he never kept it in one place. The photograph. She nodded. One piece. The locker. Another piece. And the backpacks. She smiled sadly. Daniel once told me. She closed her eyes as if hearing his voice again. If anything ever happens to me, the only person I'd trust with the final piece is Logan Mercer. I looked at her in disbelief. But why me? She finally answered the question that had haunted me since the observatory. Because after hiking with you in Yellowstone, he wrote about you in his notebook. What did he write? She looked directly into my eyes. Logan notices details everyone else misses. If I can't finish this, maybe someday he can. I couldn't speak. I barely remember that hike. Yet somehow, one ordinary afternoon had changed both of our lives forever. Claire reached into her jacket. I've been carrying this for years. She handed me a small folded piece of paper. It was old. The edges were worn. I unfolded it carefully. It was a page torn from Daniel's notebook. The handwriting matched the invisible message inside my photograph. At the bottom was one final sentence. Truth survives only if someone refuses to stop looking. Before I could say anything, a faint sound echoed from outside the cave. Voices. Several of them. Claire immediately stood. They're here. Flashlights swept across the rocks outside. One beam stopped at the entrance to the cave. A man shouted, "I found them." More footsteps. Closer. Much closer. I looked at Claire. She looked at me. Then she whispered, "Whatever happens, don't let them get the key." I tightened my grip around the brass key. The footsteps were only a few yards away now. A dark figure appeared at the entrance. The man stepped into the cave, raised a flashlight toward my face, then quietly said something I never expected to hear. "Mr. Mercer, we're here to protect you." The man lowered his flashlight. "Mr. Mercer, we're here to protect you." I stared at him. Behind him stood 4 more people wearing dark jackets. Each carried a flashlight. None of them had their weapons drawn. Claire didn't move. She stayed between me and them. "Don't believe them," she whispered. "Lumen sight." I understand why she'd say that. His voice was calm, professional. "My name is Daniel Brooks." He slowly reached into his jacket. Claire immediately stepped forward. "Don't." He froze. "I'm taking out my identification." With 2 fingers, he carefully removed a leather badge holder. This time I looked closely. Not a fake badge. Not something flashed for a split second through a windshield. It was real. Federal Bureau of Investigation. FBI. Agent Brooks placed the badge on a rock several feet away. "So neither of you has to wonder." Claire looked at me. "I still don't trust them." "I know." Brooks nodded. "And honestly, I wouldn't expect you to." He looked directly at Claire. "You've spent 4 years running from people pretending to be federal agents." The cave became completely silent. My eyes shifted toward Claire. "You never told me that." "I never had the chance." Brooks continued. "The people who rammed your Jeep tonight weren't with us. They've been using fake credentials for years." I crossed my arms. "If you're really FBI, prove it." Brooks smiled slightly. "Fair question." He reached into another pocket and removed a sealed evidence bag. Inside was my backpack. The real one. Every camera, every lens, every memory card. Exactly as I'd packed them. My breath caught. "Where did you get that?" "Seattle." "When?" "Yesterday." Claire looked just as surprised as I was. "You found it?" Brooks nodded. "It was hidden in a storage unit rented under a false name." He handed the backpack to me. Nothing was missing. Not one thing. Then he said something that changed everything. "We've been following Daniel Harper's investigation since 2022. I frowned. "Harper?" Claire looked at me. "Daniel's last name." I realized then. I had never actually known it. Brooks crouched near the cave wall. "I think it's time someone finally explained what happened." He removed a tablet from his backpack. The screen showed dozens of photographs. Aircraft, maintenance reports, bank records, news articles, then one familiar face. Daniel. He discovered that several regional aircraft had been flying with forged maintenance certificates. I listened without interrupting. He intended to publish everything. But before he could, he died. Brooks didn't immediately answer. Instead, he chose his words carefully. "We no longer believe Daniel's death was an accident." Claire quietly closed her eyes. She had known. Maybe she'd always known. But why involve me? I asked. Brooks looked straight at me. Because Daniel trusted almost nobody. He believed his apartment, phone, and office were all being watched. So he hid evidence somewhere else. Yes. But why my photograph? Brooks zoomed into one of Daniel's journal pages. There, in neat handwriting, was a sentence. Logan Mercer never edits his originals. I couldn't help smiling. That was true. I never altered my master negatives. Ever. He knew your habits. Brooks continued. He knew that if anyone wanted to hide information inside a photograph, you'd unknowingly preserve it forever. Daniel hadn't chosen me because I was his friend. He'd chosen me because he trusted the way I worked. Claire finally spoke. So why didn't you find Logan sooner? Brooks looked uncomfortable. We tried. What? We searched for you both. For 4 years. I frowned. You knew who I was. Yes. Then why not knock on my door? Because every time we got close, someone else got there first. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? Brooks tapped another photograph. It showed my apartment building, taken months earlier. Then another. My office. Then another. A coffee shop I visited almost every morning. Someone had been watching me. For years. Without my knowledge. Claire slowly sat down. They were waiting for Daniel's final piece. Brooks nodded. They believed Logan already had it. But I didn't. No. You didn't even know it existed. He looked toward the brass key in my hand. Until now. I reached into my pocket. The old brass key felt heavier than ever. So, this opens locker 17. Yes. What's inside? Brooks shook his head. We don't know. Claire looked surprised. You've never opened it? No. Why not? Because only one person could. I frowned. What? Brooks smiled faintly. The locker requires 2 keys. I stared at him. 2. He slowly opened his hand. Resting on his palm was another brass key, stamped with the number 18. Claire looked completely confused. Daniel told us. Brooks said quietly that if either key was used alone, the evidence would destroy itself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, so he split the access. Exactly. You had 1 key. Claire had the other. No. Claire interrupted. I never had key 18. Brooks smiled. I know. He looked at me. We did. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Outside, the first light of dawn began creeping across the ocean. Brooks finally broke the silence. The locker is still exactly where Daniel left it. Seattle Union Station. Locker 17. He stood up. We leave in 1 hour. I looked at Claire. She looked back at me. After everything we'd been through. The plane. The backpacks. The chase. The observatory. The crash. The truth had brought us right back to where this journey had begun. Seattle. Brooks picked up his flashlight. One more thing. What? He looked unusually serious. Our surveillance team intercepted a phone call 3 hours ago. My stomach tightened. What did it say? Brooks answered quietly. They know you're going to locker 17. The cave fell silent again. Then he added the one sentence none of us wanted to hear. And this time, they're sending someone who never misses. By 7 o'clock that morning, we were already on the road to Seattle. For the first time since this nightmare had begun. I wasn't chasing Claire. I wasn't chasing clues. I finally knew where the answers were waiting. Locker 17. The brass key never left my hand. I kept turning it over between my fingers, wondering how one small piece of metal had quietly shaped 4 years of my life. Across from me, Claire stared out the window. She hadn't said much since we left the cave. Every now and then, she'd glance at me as if making sure I was still there. Maybe she was. Agent Brooks drove. Another FBI SUV followed behind us. The atmosphere inside the vehicle was tense. No radio, no conversation. Just the sound of tires rolling over wet pavement. After nearly an hour, Brooks finally spoke. There's something you should know before we reach Seattle. Claire turned toward him. What is it? We've confirmed someone inside the maintenance company leaked our movements. So they know we're coming. Yes. And they know about the locker. Brooks nodded. They've known for years. I frowned. If they knew about the locker, Why didn't they empty it? Brooks smiled. They tried. When? Twice. And they couldn't open it. I looked at the brass key. So Daniel wasn't bluffing. No, he designed the lock himself. Claire looked surprised. He wasn't an engineer. No, but one of his closest friends was. 8 hours later, the Seattle skyline appeared through the windshield, for the first time in days. I felt like a stranger in my own city. The Space Needle rose above the buildings. Ferries crossed Elliott Bay. People hurried through downtown without any idea that somewhere beneath the city, a secret had been waiting for years. Seattle Union Station hadn't changed much. The old marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight. Commuters rushed toward arriving trains. Families hugged. Tourists dragged heavy suitcases across the lobby. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary was about to happen. Brooks checked his watch. Our team has secured every entrance. I counted at least 8 agents blending into the crowd. Some pretended to read newspapers. Others stood in line for coffee. No one would have guessed they were FBI. Claire whispered, "I've never been here before." I smiled faintly. Neither have I. The storage lockers were located beneath the main concourse. A long hallway stretched beneath the station. Rows of steel doors lined both walls. Locker 1, Locker 2, Locker 3. My heartbeat grew louder with every step. Finally, Locker 17. It looked ordinary. Gray metal. Scratches from years of use. Nothing special. And yet, people had died trying to protect what was inside. Brooks removed the second brass key. "You first." I inserted key 17. He inserted key 18. "Ready." I nodded. We turned both keys at exactly the same moment. Click. A heavy mechanical sound echoed inside the locker. Then, nothing. It didn't open. Claire frowned. Brooks tried again. Another click. Still nothing. I looked closer. There has to be something else. Then I noticed a tiny engraving beneath the keyhole. Almost invisible. A camera icon. My pulse quickened. "It's not just the keys." Brooks looked at me. "What?" I reached into my backpack. My old camera. The one Claire had returned. I mounted the telephoto lens. Then I looked through the viewfinder at the locker door. A hidden message appeared where the naked eye saw only scratched metal. Invisible markings. Daniel had used infrared ink. I slowly read the words aloud. "Take the photograph." "What photograph?" Claire asked. I stepped backward. Then I realized. The locker. It wasn't the lock. It was the entire door. I raised my camera. Focused. Pressed the shutter. Click. For 1 second. Nothing happened. Then a tiny green light illuminated beside the keyhole. A deep metallic clunk echoed through the hallway. The locker door slowly swung open. Inside, there wasn't a box, or a folder, or stacks of documents. Instead, a small black hard drive rested on a velvet cloth. Beside it lay a sealed envelope. And underneath both, Daniel's notebook. Claire's eyes instantly filled with tears. She gently picked it up. I thought this was destroyed. Brooks carefully lifted the hard drive. "If this contains what Daniel believed it did, everything ends today." Suddenly, one of the agents upstairs shouted through his radio. "Agent Brooks." His voice was panicked. "We've got movement." Another voice interrupted. "Multiple armed suspects entering the station." The hallway exploded into activity. "Protect the evidence." Brooks shouted. Agents rushed toward the staircase. The sound of screaming echoed from above. People began running. Somewhere upstairs. A gunshot rang out. Then another. Claire grabbed my arm. "Logan." Before she could finish, the station lights suddenly went out. Complete darkness swallowed the hallway. Emergency alarms began screaming. Red backup lights flickered to life. The hard drive was still in Brooks' hand. Then, out of the darkness, a single figure stepped into the red light at the end of the corridor. Tall, black coat, face hidden beneath a hood. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding another brass key. He smiled. Then he said quietly, Daniel always did love backup plans. The emergency lights painted the hallway in deep red. Alarms echoed through Seattle Union Station. People were screaming upstairs. Agents shouted orders through their radios. And at the far end of the corridor, the man in the black coat stood perfectly still. He wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He simply watched us. Then he held up the brass key. It wasn't marked 17 or 18. It carried a different number. 19. For a moment, no one moved. Agent Brooks broke the silence. FBI. Don't move. The man smiled. I've heard that before. Then, without warning, he tossed the key across the hallway. It slid across the marble floor and stopped at my feet. Everyone looked at it. The man spoke calmly. Go ahead, Logan. Pick it up. I didn't. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The stranger nodded as though he expected my reaction. Daniel said you'd be careful. My heart skipped. You knew Daniel. The smile disappeared. I knew him better than anyone. Claire stepped forward. Who are you? The man slowly pulled back his hood. For the first time, I saw his face. Late 40s. Dark hair streaked with gray. A scar ran across his left cheek. Claire suddenly froze. Her face turned completely white. Uncle Nathan. The words barely left her mouth. I looked at her. You know him. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Lumen sight. I was hoping you wouldn't recognize me. Claire took a step backward. My mother said you died. Nathan laughed quietly. Your mother believed what she was told. Brooks immediately raised his weapon. Nathan Harper. You're under arrest. Nathan smiled again. I don't think so. He pressed a button hidden inside a small remote. The station lights flickered. Somewhere above us, a loud explosion echoed through the building. Dust fell from the ceiling. The alarms became even louder. Brooks shouted into his radio. Status. Only static answered. Nathan looked directly at me. I don't have much time. His voice was different now. Less threatening. Almost tired. I didn't come for the hard drive. Brooks frowned. Don't listen to him. Nathan ignored him. I came because Daniel left something unfinished. Claire's eyes filled with tears. You helped them. Nathan closed his eyes. Yes. I betrayed my own nephew. Silence. I've regretted it every day since. No one spoke. Finally, Nathan reached into his coat. Every agent raised their weapon. Instead of a gun. He pulled out an old cassette tape. He carefully placed it on the floor. Daniel wanted you to hear this. Claire whispered, Is that? Nathan nodded. The original recording. Brooks carefully picked it up. What is it? Nathan looked at me. His final message. We found an old cassette player in the station's security office a few minutes later. No one left the room. Not even Nathan. He simply sat in a chair with his hands visible. The tape began to play. Static. Then Daniel's familiar voice. If possible. He sounded calmer than before. If you're hearing this. Then I didn't make it. Claire quietly wiped away tears. Daniel continued. Claire. I'm sorry. I promised I'd come home. A long silence followed. Then. Logan. I looked up. Even after all these years. He was speaking directly to me. You probably don't remember our hike. I smiled sadly. I do now, I whispered. The recording continued. You spent 3 hours helping strangers without expecting anything in return. You noticed details everyone else ignored. You reminded me that good people still existed. Claire reached for my hand. Without thinking. I held hers. Daniel kept speaking. That's why I chose you. Not because you were a photographer. Because you were the kind of man who wouldn't stop once he knew the truth. I couldn't breathe. The recording wasn't finished. Daniel's voice became more serious. The hard drive contains every document. Every payment. Every forged inspection. Every name. Then came the sentence none of us expected. But the hard drive is only a copy. Everyone in the room looked at Brooks. What? Daniel continued. The real evidence. A loud crack echoed outside the office. Gunfire. Brooks immediately motioned for everyone to stay down. The recording kept playing. Is inside my camera. I frowned. My camera. Claire shook her head. No. Daniel laughed softly. Not Logan's. A pause. Mine. Nathan slowly lowered his head. He already knew. Daniel's final words echoed through the speakers. You'll find it exactly where we first met. The tape stopped. Click. Silence. Brooks looked at Nathan. Where's Daniel's camera? Nathan answered quietly. I don't know. Claire stared at him. You're lying. No. I destroyed everything else. But I could never find the camera. I suddenly remembered something. The panoramic photograph. Daniel had been carrying a camera that day in Yellowstone. The same day we met. My mind raced. Then it hit me. The overlook. Claire turned toward me. What? The wooden overlook where we had lunch. Brooks understood immediately. Yellowstone. I nodded. He said. Exactly where we first met. Nathan closed his eyes. Then, almost smiling, he whispered, Daniel. You were smarter than all of us. Before anyone could say another word, a young FBI agent burst into the room. Agent Brooks. What? We decrypted part of the hard drive. And the young agent looked directly at me. Sir. Your name is all over the files. The room fell completely silent. Brooks frowned. That's impossible. The agent slowly shook his head. No, sir. It looks like Daniel made Logan the legal owner of every piece of evidence. I stared at him in disbelief. What? The agent swallowed. Which means, without Logan Mercer, none of this can be used in court. There are moments in life when everything suddenly makes sense. Not because the pain disappears. Not because every question is answered. But because for the first time, you understand why you had to live through it all. For me. That moment began in Yellowstone National Park. 3 days after opening Locker 17, our convoy arrived at the same trail where Daniel and I had first met 11 years earlier. The forest hadn't changed. The pine trees were taller. The wooden path had been rebuilt. But the mountains looked exactly the same. I stood there holding the old panoramic photograph. Claire stood beside me. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. Agent Brooks unfolded a map. Daniel mentioned the overlook. I nodded. I remember where it is. As we climbed the trail, forgotten memories kept returning. Daniel asking about my camera. Sharing sandwiches with complete strangers. Laughing because a squirrel had stolen someone's backpack. Such an ordinary afternoon. Yet somehow, it had changed the course of our lives. 40 minutes later, we reached the overlook. The same wooden railing. The same breathtaking valley. The same enormous pine tree growing beside the platform. I walked toward it almost instinctively. Then I stopped. There, carved into the trunk, barely visible after all these years, were 2 small letters. D.H. Daniel Harper. He marked it. Claire whispered. I knelt beside the roots. The ground looked untouched, but one flat stone seemed slightly different from the others. I lifted it. Underneath, a small waterproof case. No one moved. Brooks slowly opened it. Inside was an old digital camera. Daniel's camera, exactly where he had promised it would be. The memory card was still inside. Hours later, FBI technicians recovered everything. Thousands of photographs, videos, recorded interviews, signed maintenance reports, secret financial transfers, emails, and one final video, recorded by Daniel himself. The entire investigation changed overnight. The maintenance company executives were arrested. Several inspectors admitted they had accepted bribes. The people responsible for falsifying aircraft inspections were finally exposed. Nathan Harper testified in court. He accepted responsibility for his role. And because of his testimony, several families finally learned the truth about what had happened to their loved ones. It didn't erase their grief, but it ended years of unanswered questions. Months passed. Life slowly became quiet again. The television interviews stopped. The newspapers moved on. People forgot our names. Honestly, I was grateful. I had never wanted to become part of the headline. I just wanted my life back. One evening, Claire invited me to Port Crescent. The lighthouse looked exactly as I remembered. Arthur Whitmore was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea. I had a feeling you'd both come back. He smiled. This place has been too quiet without you. We spent hours watching the waves. No FBI, no clues, no secrets, just peace, for the first time since we met. We talked about ordinary things, favorite movies, bad cooking, road trips, music, the kind of conversation 2 people should have had from the beginning. A year later, I asked Claire if she'd take one more trip with me. She laughed. Should I be worried? Probably. She rolled her eyes. That sounds about right. We drove back to Yellowstone, not because we needed answers, because we wanted new memories. We stopped at the same overlook, the same place where Daniel unknowingly introduced 2 strangers whose lives would one day become inseparable. As the sun began setting behind the mountains, I reached into my jacket. Claire immediately smiled. No. Yes. You planned this. For months. I knelt on one knee. Claire Donovan. The first time I saw you, I thought you'd ruined my life. She laughed through tears. I know, but now I know the truth. You didn't ruin it. You gave it back. I opened the small wooden ring box. Will you marry me? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she knelt beside me, placed one hand against my cheek, and whispered, I've loved you since the day you chose to follow a stranger instead of giving up. Then she smiled. Yes. 1 year later, we were married, not in a cathedral, not on a beach, not in a luxury hotel. We chose the place where our impossible story had truly begun. The old railway platform at Black Pine Station had been restored by the local community after hearing everything that had happened there. Arthur walked Claire down the platform. Agent Brooks stood in the front row. Even Nathan attended after serving his sentence. He never asked for forgiveness. He simply thanked Claire for giving him one last chance to tell the truth. Today, as I'm telling you this story, there's one photograph hanging above my desk. Not the award-winning wildlife picture that changed my career. Not the newspaper cover. Not our wedding. It's an old panoramic photograph from Yellowstone. Most people who see it notice the mountains. Some notice the hikers. Almost nobody notices the young journalist standing beside a photographer he had only just met. But I notice him every single day. Because if Daniel Harper hadn't trusted a stranger for just 3 hours, I would have boarded Flight 247. And I wouldn't be here telling you this story. People often ask me if I believe in fate. I don't know. Maybe fate is real. Maybe it isn't. But I do know this. Sometimes a missed flight is not the end of your plans. Sometimes it's the beginning of the life you were always meant to live. And every now and then, the person who seems to turn your world upside down becomes the person who teaches you what home truly feels like. The end.